I remember where I was when the world's supply of cliches was finally used up. It was a dark and stormy night. I was working on a short story, but I know that listening to storytellers tell stories about telling stories can be as bad as reading books about writers writing books. They can't all be Wonder Boys. So I'll spare you those unpleasant details and just say that we should have seen it coming. We should have seen it coming because all the metaphors, similes, idioms, and pop culture references had already gone extinct. One word at a time, we diminished our resources far too fast for any hope of replenishing them. And after they were gone, everyone was left with speechless, and everyone was looking for something to blame, and a lot of fingers were pointed at people like Joss Whedon or Quentin Tarantino. Others blamed rap music. Still others said it was the fault of writers like Nick Hornby and Chuck Palahniuk and some no-name out of Minneapolis. But the truth was, we were all to blame. Even those of us who used them sparingly still used them. Sure, we may not have been as bad as the folks who ran around comparing things to other things they really had nothing to do with, out of some sense of moral obligation just to use them up before some undeserving undesirables got their hands on them, but we were still part of the problem. Even the few foresightful individuals who tried to save their words, who tried to warn the rest of the world what was coming, yes, even they played a part. They'd make desperate pleas like, no matter how cold it gets, just say what the temperature really is. For God's sake, do not make another Hoth reference. Then they'd realize, all too late, that they just used one up themselves. And before we knew it, we were left with no other means to describe things than that of actually describing them. In all the chaos, the panic, and the hoarding that followed, I'm fairly certain that there were a few phrases that I never heard squandered. A handful of clever quips that were never uttered may have avoided that descent into verbal oblivion. Of course, I couldn't tell you what they were now. But I like to think that there's some separatist society somewhere up in the hills keeping those last few remnants of the more imaginative aspects of the lexicon alive, waiting for the day they can be released back into a safer world and allowed to flourish once again. Of course, I'd like to go on, but by now there isn't much left to say. The fables are gone, as are the folk tales. I can't tell you when I last saw a cautionary tale or a myth or a legend. In fact, you can barely get your hands on a parable these days. And I'd hoped to end this with something poignant or clever, or at least a really good pun, but the words just aren't there. Even what's left, even those few figures of speech that haven't yet gone the way of the dodo, might soon. As people keep drawing on an ever-dwindling supply of things to say, we draw closer and closer to the day when we've nothing left to us but grunts, vague gestures, and emoticons with which to get our points across. So I'll dip into what's left. I'll try to make a point now as well as I can with what few turns of phrase remain. Of course, I don't have the exact words. I wouldn't even call the words I have sufficient. The closest thing to what I want to say that I can think to say is pretty much as far from the words as I need as it could possibly be, but I hope you'll find some meaning in it nonetheless, for once it's reached the point of misuse, overuse, and just plain inappropriate use, it too will be gone. And I fear that time is coming soon. So on that note, LOL. Thank you.